My name is Jenna Bosiger. Thank you for watching my Cryptid Cryptids YouTube channel. On this episode, were the Anasazi victims to skinwalker attacks. I also look for more clues to find out who the Anasazi were and why they disappeared. And I do this by examining the relationships between the kachinas, the skinwalkers, and the Anasazi. After doing my video about the kachinas and then my video about the skinwalkers, I had the idea that maybe the Anasazi were the kachinas in disguise, and maybe the skinwalkers were the reason for the Anasazi's disappearance. The Navajo did not like the Anasazi, as is shown in the translation for the Navajo word, Anasazi, which translates to ancient enemies. And this is according to hcn.org, jeffposse.net, janetpanic.com, and these are just to name a few because this is what is said about the translation of the name Anasazi, and that it was a Navajo word. And it's also said that it translates more specifically to alien, enemy, foreigner, and non-Navajo. Ana means war, and Sazi means someone that once was whole but now is scattered. The Hopi and the Zuni feel very differently about this same group of people that we call the Anasazi. It's agreed that they were here before the Native Americans arrived, but the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Pueblo see the Anasazi as ancient ancestors, and the name has been changed from Anasazi to Ancestral Puebloan. But I think it's going to be hard to erase the word Anasazi, even though I understand the reason for it. And they also believed that the Anasazi were peaceful and had advanced knowledge and skills. So for this research, I need to find out if the timelines match up. And I found out that they do match up very exactly. MatrixDisclosure.com says that the Anasazi reigned from 100 to 1600 AD. I think it's more likely that they reigned from 100 to 1300, and then from 1300 to 1600, they were chased relentlessly by the skinwalkers and facing genocide. MedicineManGallery.com says that the first circulation of kachina dolls was in the 1300s. So that tells me that contact between the kachinas and the Hopi and the Zuni and the other neighboring tribes happened in around 1300. And the kachina are said to have made contact with the Puebloan, the Zuni, and the Hopi, and surrounding them are the Navajo, and they're the only ones that don't have a history with kachinas. And according to janetpanic.com, World History Portal, the Navajo and the Apache made up the largest non-Puebloan group in the Southwest, and that the two tribes led nomadic lifestyles and spoke the same language. It also says that they were active in New Mexico in the 13th century, which is from 1201 to 1300 AD, which is the time that keeps popping up everywhere. It is said that the time that Chaco Canyon was abandoned was 1300 AD. This is coming from treehaws.com. And they also say that the Anasazi were in Mesa Verde, which is in Colorado, for a very short time from 1275 to 1300 when it was abandoned. So the fact that contact was made with the kachinas in the 1300s, contact was made with the Anasazi in the 1300s, the Anasazi were chased out of Chaco Canyon in the 1300s, chased out of Mesa Verde in the 1300s, all at the same time that the Native Americans arrived to the area, where they all agree, at least on the fact that the Anasazi were there first. And then I found this quote from Tree Hawes also that says exactly what I'm kind of proposing. It says, although earlier ancestral Puebloan villages were built in the open, these people began to build cliff dwellings about 1150, perhaps as defense against the invading groups of ancestral Navajo and Apache. So I feel much better knowing that I'm not the only one saying this, and I'm not the only one that has come up with this. According to NavajoCodeTalkers.org, the witchery way, during their rituals, Navajo practitioners of witchcraft focus on corpses. The sorcery way, during ceremonies, the victims have their personal objects or body parts, such as hair, buried. And then the wizardry way, foreign objects like poison or cursed darts are injected into the victim. And the frenzy way, charms are used that influence the victim's mental or emotional states. Examining the witchery way, I found out that is the way of the skinwalkers, and that this is what they practice. And so who were they practicing this on? They were likely practicing it on their declared enemies, the Anasazi. Okay, the Navajo were known for raiding nearby tribes, and I can back that up. Encyclopedia.com, I quote, Apaches and Navajos, for example, raided both each other and sedentary Pueblo Indian tribes in an effort to acquire goods through plunder, end quote. A culture that often raids other tribes. Be very distrusting of, say, a group of kachinas that comes running through the village in the middle of the night, whooping it up, which is what I read that they did and how they made first contact with the Hopi. And in a lot of the paintings, you can see the kachinas kind of sneaking around the villages, and it's usually nighttime, and they're, dancing. One of the things I remember hearing is that they wore disguises because they didn't want to frighten the people with their true appearance. So they were similar to humans, but they weren't the same. But they did put these disguises on of antlers, and they used all kinds of things, nature, feathers and stuff, and even paint to disguise themselves. So according to the Hopi, the kachinas were not gods, they were watchers. It says, the gods sent them, and their mission was to teach, defend, and watch over the Hopi. It goes on to say, the kachinas were real physical beings of flesh and blood, and they looked just like ordinary humans. They came from a distant planet, and this is from ancientpages.com. So the kachina made peaceful contact with the Zuni, the Puebloan, and the Hopi, and there's no mention of the Navajo making contact with the kachinas in the past, but they would have made contact with them, or tried to, if they did it with all the tribes around them. The history, according to Navajo Code, the history of the Navajo formulated Navajo Kachina for commercial purposes. And then NavajoKachinas.com says the Navajo kachinas really have no religious meaning to the Navajos. The Hopi, the Zuni, and the Puebloan placed a great deal of spiritual value on the kachinas, and that's probably because they made peaceful first contact with them. The Navajo started making kachina dolls to sell to the tourists, and they don't have any meaning to them like they do to the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Puebloan. The Navajo are not part of the kachina culture, and they thought the inhabitants of Chaco Canyon were evil witches. According to legendsofamerica.com, the great house at Chaco was known to the Navajo as Witchcraft Woman's House. KMCCoffrey.com says that Elder Navajo say that Chaco was a place of hideous evil. The Navajo skinwalkers might have been created in response to the kachinas and to rid themselves of the Anasazi. That's assuming they were the same. But they didn't seem to like the kachinas or the Anasazi, and so it's possible that they were the same. The kachinas were in disguise. So did the Navajos copy the way that the kachinas used these disguises, except their take on it was just to be like purely terrifying and evil, both in the way they looked and in their deeds? Did they invent the skinwalkers and witchcraft as a way to fight, to go to war with the Anasazi? Here's some interesting things I found. This place called Galena, and it's in New Mexico. And Wikipedia says that the Largo Galena Anasazi, who occupied north-central New Mexico, roughly north of Jemez Mountains, and was named after the Rio Galena and Largo Canyon, which runs through the region, occupied the region from 1050 to 1300. And again, there's that year 1300. First contact with the new natives. And I'm sure that many of them feared these different looking creatures that were here first. And I'm sure many of them wanted what they had, whether it was their land or, their possessions. So here's what it says. The size of the dwellings raised some interesting questions. How tall were the occupants? Bill Crawley told me about some mummies that were found and since reburied, were adults from 3 to 3.5 feet tall. Apparently, the little hands we're seeing were not all those of children. This according to viewzone.com. Gibbon's time to the present day, no part of the Anasazi domain has produced as much evidence of prehistoric violence as Galena. More than half of the excavated sites there contain the remains of murdered men, women, and children. And though the valley lies far to the east and south of the Colorado Plateau, it ceased to be occupied around 1300. As I toured the valley with Wyatt, I realized that I had come across no stranger ruins anywhere in the southwest. The normal height for Anasazi walls is about 5 feet tall. In Galena, they average 9, and the walls are thicker than could possibly be required just to hold up roofs. Each living site is guarded by tall circular structure that may have been a lookout tower. And this is from AINIA DefenteTumblr.com. Earlier ethnographers had concluded that Jemez were the descendants of the Galena Anasazi. Whatley flatly contradicted this assertion. As we sat on the porch of the visitor center, he told me the parts of the Jemez migration epic that he was allowed to share. They have no Galena stories, he said. You've seen those sites. They don't look anything like Jemez dwellings. These people aren't descended from Galena. On their way here, an advance party of Jemez came through the Galena area. At first, they were treated hospitably by the people living there. The large main body of Jemez was coming right behind. That main body eliminated all of Galena, maybe in only a few days. I mused on the Jemez oral tradition, which, before Whatley, no Anglo had been privileged to learn. I realized that it explained a lot. It It accounted for the end of the Galena in 1300 and for the extensive evidence there of violence and death, and it might be one more piece to the complex puzzle of the abandonment. Okay. David Roberts, In Search of the Old Ones, 2010. Many of the excavation sites done in ancient Galena settlements reveal blitzkrieg-like massacres where villagers were suddenly slaughtered and their bodies left to rot, or were dumped into their towers and burned. What could have inspired such fear and hatred in the other natives? What made the Galena so different? According to an article online by ancientorigin.com, the archaeology and the anthropology of the Anasazi early American anthropology is filled with reports of human remains that exhibited unique physical traits and theories of a vanished ethnic group. However, this narrative was rejected by the academic authorities of the time, including the Smithsonian and the National Geographic Society, even though it was their own experts advancing such theories. Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah are littered with strange ruins and petroglyphs that are vaguely attributed to tribes that preceded modern Native Americans. In an article from National Geographic from 2016, Aaron Sider explored the odd reality that the ruling elite of Chaco Canyon culture had 6 fingers and toes. Hence the title of the article, Extra Fingers and Toes were revered in ancient culture. The article states that anthropologist Patricia Crown from the University of New Mexico was originally fascinated by the divine powers attributed to polydactyls among the Mayan. Polydactyls are humans with extra fingers or toes. Crown goes on to summarize her team's findings in Chaco Canyon. We found that the people with 6 toes especially were common and seemed to be associated with important ritual structures and had high status objects like turquoise. If you're more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, until next time, bye.